What is up, guys? Welcome back to this new video. In this video we'll be going over all the changes to containers and artifacts, which honestly have been huge and completely changing the meta. If you want to know all the rest that is new in this season, Horrors of the Zone in Stalcraft X, you can click the link in the description to go to that video, or click the eye icon on the right top corner of this video to go to that video as well. Anyway, let's get started with the deep dive. So the article on containers and artifacts rework start off by saying, for a long time you only saw hints and spoilers from the development fields. Pieces of new container branches, bits and pieces of information. Now it's time to put your everything together and show it directly in the game. We have provided you with a complete overview of all the changes that have affected containers and artifacts. The main goal of the update is to make the system of containers, backpacks and artifacts cohesive and convenient. To make it easier to understand the mechanics, more interesting to get our builds, and always have room for choice without unnecessary tweaks and incomprehensible restrictions. Now containers and backpacks differ not only in the number of slots, but also in the effectiveness. Small and cheap models have become significantly more useful, while bulky ones still offer maximum power but require investment and resources. Armor no longer affects container selection, so there are no disadvantages or disadvantages to armor plus container combination. Put on whatever you wanted, combine it with anything else and go for a raid. As for artifacts, some of them had their presets reworked, which added even more variety to builds and allowed their potential to be revealed in a new way. This has made it more easier to construct builds and customize them to suit your playing style. So, changes to containers and backpacks. What has changed and why? They have reworked the container and backpack system to make it more intuitive, diverse, and balanced. First of all, container effectiveness is a parameter that was always there but not really used, and it is finally used after this update. So, previously the difference was mainly felt in the number of slots, but now the effectiveness parameter is very important as well, which enhances the artifacts inside the container. Now what does this mean? Let's take a simple example. Suppose an artifact gives 4% vitality. In a container with 100% effectiveness, this number will not change. In a container with 150% effectiveness, the output is 6%. But also in a container with 50% effectiveness, the output is only 2%. So it's very important to look at these effectivenesses, because sometimes you'll see that, for example, a container only has 85% effectiveness, which will change the output of your artifact, so it will, make your artifact less useful, let's say. So there's, for example, a container with 7 slots, as you can see on the screen right now, but its effectiveness is lower, so you're gonna lose out on some value of your artifact, so you need to very carefully construct your builds in it to make sure they're not actually just as good as a container with 6 slots, because it has better effectiveness. It should be noted that effectiveness does not affect the inputs and outputs of infections, radiation, temperature, biological infection, psi effect, and frost, but it can affect debuffs, either strengthening or weakening them. So the debuffs are reaction to electricity, reaction to frost, whatever, like these reaction things, those are the debuffs. So it does strengthen or weaken them, but it does not strengthen or weaken the infections such as radiation, temperature, bioinfection, psi effect, and frost. Different types of containers have also become more equal. Small containers are simpler, offer less power due to the slots, but are easier to handle. Heavy and spacious ones still deliver maximum power, but require more effort to assemble. For example, the Cocoon, a tier 8 standard container, has 3 slots, 100% effectiveness, and 89.5% protection. The Canister, a tier 8 bulky container, has 5 slots, 75% effectiveness, and 60% protection. With only 3 artifacts available, it is obviously more advantageous to use Cocoon, as it allows you to maximize the power of the artifacts, achieving a total of 300% effectiveness compared to 225% for the Canister. But if we fill the canister full of artifacts, we will get 375%. As a result, canister has more potential power, but it also requires more artifacts, as well as the use of an artifact with infection output due to the reduced internal protection. Cocoon implies an easier build method, where you can do without output artifacts in principle, but it will be slightly inferior to the canister. So essentially these really big ones, you're gonna most likely just have to have more artifacts, which will be more costly, and it will just gain you a couple of percentages. This is only relevant in my experience really for late game, so I do think this is interesting because it will allow to make honestly pretty decent builds for a relatively low amount of money for mid-game players, which I do think is a great addition to get people into artifacts build more often, as it used to be kind of something really more for the late game earlier on, because you really needed at least blue or pink artifacts to make a build worthwhile. On average, containers with numerous slots allow you to unlock greater potential but require more effort on your part to build. Container protection has also been redesigned. This change gives more freedom for builds and forces players to choose artifacts more carefully. In some cases, you will have to choose artifacts of a certain quality to fit them into a container without an artifact to remove the infection. Weight and speed of container equipment. The weight and speed of equipment depends on the number of slots and the type of container. Compact ones are lighter and quicker to put on, while larger ones are heavier and take longer to equip. Now it's time worth considering choosing smaller containers for secondary builds. So for example, if you have a PvP build in another one and you want to be able to switch quickly, so you know, like if you bind it to your wheel or whatever, like you're equipping it just like grabbing a weapon, your draw speed essentially of your backpack will be lower with small ones or light ones, and it will be longer or higher with heavy ones. So if you put everything in a heavy backpack, it's gonna take longer to equip than with a light backpack. So I do think this is a good change because it does make for a sort of more versatile use. I am curious as to see how this is actually gonna have a big impact in practice though. Then obtain and price. Since containers have been approved, we have adjusted the rate at which they are obtained, and they are now more expensive than they were, but the amount of serum required remains the same. Protection and backpack logic. Now backpacks offer protection comparable to fully fledged containers. You can imagine that the same containers are inside. We can also see this kind of in the little models that are unfortunately temporary, because honestly, personally, I do actually like them, and I think it can be as simple as just literally keeping these models, but it does say that those are temporary models and they will be changed. New backpack groups. We have organized backpacks by type, maintaining continuity between branches. However, there may still be differences within each group, so the division into 3 categories below is a guideline rather than a strict rule. As a result, the number of slots for artifacts could also change depending on which group the backpack belonged to. So, light backpacks have high protection, few slots, give less weight than regular ones, but compensated with a speed boost. Standard ones have weak protection, many slots, provide the greatest amount of weight. So they have just an enormous amount of carry weight. As you can see, the Secret Valley backpack has like 70 built-in carry weight, which is absolutely ridiculous. But it does lack in protection. Then heavy, medium protection, medium number of slots, give less weight than regular ones, but have increased effectiveness. So this would be like the coffin backpack. With it obviously comes also a barter branch rework. The backpack and container branches have been reworked and expanded. For example, compact and bulky containers now have full-fledged lines, and old backpacks such as Yachttasche or Soviet Travel Backpack are included in new branches. I do think this is very interesting, but it is a big L for everybody that got, for example, the SMC container or you know, the Soviet Travel Backpack from crates, because now they are not worth as much, I think, because you can craft them, although I can see people buying them for a pretty still substantial amount, especially for example the master tier ones, because it costs money and resources to craft them anyway, so people are, you know, saying whatever, I'll just buy them. So we'll have to see how this plays out on the market. Then barter branch changes and edits. So as you already saw in the screenshot, there's some huge changes. So I'll go over them really fast, but I won't go over all the specific details because it's gonna take ages and it's honestly just numbers. I'll just kind of group them together. So the KZS line, which eventually goes to the SMC container, has an equipment speed of 1.5 seconds instead of 2. And then a bunch of them have been changed rank, and there's also gonna be a bunch of compensations going on. So for example, if you have a KZS1, you'll be granted a KZS1U. If you have a KZS3 or a KZS3U, you will be granted a canister U. If you had a KZS4 or KZS4U or a KZS5 or a KZS5U, you will get a Kega. Then people who have had the Cocoon container will get a Cell U container. There's also a bunch of new ones in that line. Then the Berloga 4 container and the Berloga 4U container have been changed to the Berloga 5 container. So if you've had any of these, you'll find that you got a Berloga 5 container now. One interesting one to note, where I am going to go into the little details of what exactly changed, is Zivka's Arctic save. I'm going into it because it was one you had to obtain for Act tickets in Act 1. They have put the internal protection to 75% and made the cold from -1 to -2.5, so it's really made to build frost artifact builds in it. They removed the speed debuff, which is pretty cool, and they have increased its weight and its equipment speed, so it will equip slower, and it's now a capacious container and not a standard one. So overall, I'm not too sure how I feel about this, because it just, especially with the change of the equipment of containers, now you can wear anything with any armor, it did become kind of like worse. It is nice that they buffed the cold, but still, I don't know how I feel about this. I'll see if I'm still gonna use it. Then the Berloga 6U container has been changed into the Berloga 6 container, because they did not differ from each other for a long time, and Expo didn't want to make them an alternative version, as the Arctic, for example, is now. So they decided to postpone the Berloga 6U until better times and transferred it into the legendary container category. So players that had the Berloga 6U, I'm very sorry, you won't get that legendary Berloga 6U container. You'll just get the Berloga 6 container, which will just be essentially as good as the Berloga 6U anyway. Then there's a bunch of new backpacks in the speed build one as well, which is pretty cool. And then when it comes to the duffel bags and the Soviet travel backpack, we have some huge replacement changes. So if you had the duffel bag, you'll be awarded the MBSS backpack. If you had the Errant Junior backpack, you'll be awarded the duffel bag. If you had the MBSS backpack, you'll be awarded the Errant Junior backpack. If you had the Tri-Zip backpack, you'll be rewarded the MBSS backpack. If you had the Soviet travel backpack, you'll be awarded the Tri-Zip backpack. So essentially, you all got bumped one rank down mostly, which I think is kind of annoying, because the Soviet travel backpack is like literally in the barter tree, and now suddenly I have a Tri-Zip backpack instead and I need to craft it again. I get that they did it because it has a different rarity tier, but it still feels kind of shitty. So yeah, I'm not too sure how I feel about that. Then the Hellboy backpack has been changed into the reinforced Hellboy backpack. And we also have a new master tier for the upgrade for the Yachttasche, which honestly looks like one of the best ones. Just meta-wise, I feel like this is gonna be the one that is gonna allow for the most all-around open world builds, but we'll have to see how it plays out. Then for the two other act tickets type of backpacks, the Chitin, it got its effectiveness increased to 115% and its carry weight to 40, which is pretty cool. But it also got its weight increased to 8.1 from 3.5. And it has been made into a standard backpack instead of a heavy one. And then the Overton container has also got its speed debuff removed, and its healing effectiveness has been increased to 31.3, and its weight has been reduced from 9.9 to 9.2. Its equipment speed has been raised from 2 to 2.5, and its container type has been changed to capacious instead of standard. Again, honestly, I just mostly like the Overton for its design anyway. I don't think I'll be buying it now because there's so many good alternatives just in the barter tree, which I do kind of like, because honestly, yeah, let people just grind for it regularly. Don't make them try to get act tickets, which you get more if you pay for the battle pass. You know, like it felt less accessible to newer players, so I do like that now everything's just out in the open in the barter tree. Like, you have a lot of good options there. Then another important one, armor changes. The main change is that all containers and backpacks are now compatible with any armor except the IU2, but that is temporary. So this has greatly, kind of diminished the use of combo suits, especially in PvP, because that was one of their main advantages. So in return for that, they have received some buffs. Previously, suits and containers became hostages of each other, where due to compatibility only with a specific container, the suits were simply not used with other containers, and conversely, when due to the unpopularity of the costume, the container was hardly used. In this regard, suits received certain buffs or debuffs to their characteristics, but after the possibility of using any containers with any suits arose, the need for this disappeared. So the basic characteristics were changed. X-Boy is gonna carefully monitor the balance of all suits and understand that they will always attract a lot of attention, but the current changes relate exclusively to containers. We are removing the system of bonuses and penalties associated with them. This step allows for more accurate monitoring of the situation and prevents mixing different elements of the balance. Yeah, again, I'm not entirely sure how I feel about this, but I do think this is gonna play out better over the long run and allow for more versatile builds and gameplay mechanics, or like, you know, build mechanics for your artifact build. So as I said, it's gonna be essentially combo suits that got buffs because they, well, became less useful now. So they received some bullet resistance buffs to compensate for that, to make them, you know, more attractive for PvP still. So first of all, the Phantom Hunter armored suit is actually one of the few ones that got nerfed. It has gone from 161 to 154 bullet resistance. Then the Albatross Heavy, Zivk's M2C, both got buffed, and then the Longevity actually got buffed a lot, like by quite a few bullet resistance, so that's pretty cool. Then the Zivk's 2A also got a buff. The Rigel got a buff, the CD4 got a buff, the Entails got a buff, the Raps got a buff, the Beast Slayer got a buff, the Scythian 5 got a buff, the Saturn also got quite a slight bump, the Hounds also got a relatively good bump up, so that's pretty cool, the Investigator got a bump up, the Punisher got a buff, the Exosuit Missionary got a buff, the Zivk's M2O got a buff, the Storyteller and Artist Cloak got a buff, the MIS X Atlas has got a buff, the Blizzard Walker got a buff, the Bridget got a buff. I mean, you see where this is going. They essentially all got a buff, so that's pretty cool. I do think that's a relatively okay compensation for now, but I'm curious to see how this is going to play out in practice. Although people were kind of complaining about this removed the whole point of combo suits, I do still think they're higher resistances than a lot of armored suits, make them a good open world choice still. Then artifact changes. This is also a huge one because a lot of artifacts got changed quite a bit. Artifacts build became more interesting, more flexible, and synergized better with the new container system. The changes also applied to their qualities. So common artifacts now range from 85 to 100%, uncommon from 100 to 115, special to 115 and 130, rare 130 to 145, exclusive 145 to 160, legendary 160 to 175, and unique 175 to 190. Rarer artifacts are now more valuable, and the difference in stats between quality levels is now more substantial. I think this is an interesting change, and I think this will be cool in the long run because you're gonna be able to make some really cool and OP builds, but you're really gonna have to like tweak them, especially with the effectiveness modifiers of containers. First of all, before we get started with artifacts, some terms to clear things up. Artifacts have 3 main property types, but in some cases they might get a 4th one. Compensatory. First of all, the main property, the strongest one, 100%, gets upgraded with each artifact potential. The secondary property is a weaker property, 70%, but also gets upgraded with each artifact potential. So this just means like artifact upgrade when you do +1 in the research. Special property, which is one that gets unlocked by reaching a certain level of artifact potential, has a 50% upgrade. And then the compensatory property is given to artifacts in order to equalize them with others on the same level if they are weaker. Expo has also introduced different categories of artifacts that have their own properties. Weak, standard, and protective, which are the kind that give you protection from hazards. Strong output, the kind that has hazard output. Weak output, there are also others, but we'll talk about the aforementioned ones as the changes only apply to the listed ones. Weak artifacts are gone. So the main changes are that weak artifacts are gone. This category got removed. All the weak ones got moved into different groups, mainly to standard ones, and became substantially stronger. New standard tier 3 artifacts are almost equal in power to old tier 5 artifacts. Standard artifacts are all the artifacts from tier 1 to tier 3, and they now have 1.25 infection as opposed to the previous 1 to 2. This means they became especially viable. They are not only a great option for those that want little infection and a lot of extra stats, but also allow players to make budget builds composed entirely out of them, or alternatively supplement stronger artifacts, if the build doesn't have enough infection output to fit a standard artifact or higher tier. Then output artifacts. Important note is that due to the artifact changes, they had to reduce the output value by 0.8. At first the numbers might seem strange, but their influence on builds stays the same. Without this reduction, they could have broken the balancing, allowing for excessive counterplay. Yet, some common quality low-level artifacts may have suffered a bit from this, but if you upgrade its potential to level 9+, the problem disappears. And because of container improvements, many might not see the difference. So, for strong output artifacts, the special property depends on the tier. Tier 1, 3, and 5 get an additional property, and Tier 2 and Tier 4 get a stronger output. For weak output artifacts, like the Fahrenheit, Vayner, and others, they now provide 1 infection output at the baseline. Improvement of potential is no longer needed to unlock or improve it, because baseline output is enough. Now instead of infection output, an additional property acts as a normal parameter in the form of regeneration, movement speed, or vitality, and additionally their characteristics have been increased. The atom has received separate changes. It still has 4 outputs remaining, and now they are all available at the baseline, but instead of receiving additional outputs from improving a potential, it now receives proper parameters. For example, vitality, stamina regen, and bleeding output. Artifacts with high output may have other parameters reduced. High output low level artifacts now have a small amount of infection input. Then frost artifacts. Temperature output of many frost artifacts has been significantly reduced, but it's now available directly at the baseline and does not take up a special property slot, which means that artifacts gain new parameters when leveled up. For example, heal now has a special property in the form of a reaction to burns. Then psi artifacts. They now function like all the others. The input and output of the infection have been equalized, and the output of psi by the body has also become 0.5. As with other infections, there are no more special conditions. This is like kind of a nerf, or you know, everything. It's just a whole rework. We can't really be talking about nerves and buffs anymore at this point, I feel like. But yeah, it used to be 1.5 for those that didn't know. You could have anything below 1.5 psi, and it would not, you know, generate psi on your player. But now it has also been reduced to 0.5 as with other infections, which, you know, greatly reduces the amount of psi you'll be able to stomach without a counter artifact. Then protective artifacts. They have received more output at the baseline, so they can partially replace the output ones, but their protective characteristics are now lower at the baseline, and the maximum is only achieved through leveling up. This was done so that combat armors do not have a too easy way to counter infections. Then other changes change the significance of parameters such as laceration, reaction to laceration, and explosion. These characteristics should become higher on an average for artifacts, so I guess that's useful, I guess. Then artifact compensation, this I already talked about a little bit in my other video on the patch notes as well. Some artifacts have received compensation. This is due to significant changes made to them. If an artifact is eligible for compensation, a small star will appear on its icon, and there are 4 such artifacts in total. The Atom, the Polyhedron, the Ambrite, and the Eye of the Storm. Compensation is entirely optional, and you can either accept it or decline it. And the screen will look something like this. Then the adjustments to artifacts. Yeah, this is honestly pretty crazy. Like, so many things got changed. It really just threw around the whole meta. And for another reason I'm gonna come to later, the shard, the triple shard build is also kind of not possible anymore, which was one of the most popular PvP builds, I think, of the last months, year, I want to say. And I'll get to exactly why that is as well later in this video, but this is one of the big reasons that, for example, right now a scrubber also got more in demand again, because it combats bio-infection. So there's just a lot to go over. I think if you really want to look at all the numbers, go take a look for yourself. There's a link to the article in the description. I'll go over some of the ones that really stuck out for me, and I'll try my best to give a general opinion or overview. So as we can see here in the beginning, you can see that like all these are now standard artifacts, so all their infections got changed to 1.25, which I do think is good for just general equalness or something, that there's a system to it. Overall, there's honestly a lot of buffs as well to the effect, so that's pretty cool in my opinion. You can make some really cool budget builds now as well, which I do really like. A lot of artifacts, for example, like here the Firebird, got some of their things replaced and moved to additional properties. So for example, here as you can see, bleeding has been replaced with healing effectiveness, however in the additional properties. So that's what you can get when you upgrade your artifact, like +1, +2, you know, like every 5. So at +5, +10 or +15 you can get one of these additional properties, and bleeding has been moved in these additional properties. So I do think overall most artifacts didn't necessarily get a lot of changes to their values, but a lot of things got switched around, changed the values. I mean, the values did get changed, but the parameters or the properties, I mean, they got moved around quite a bit as well, but not necessarily completely deleted from the artifact. We do, however, have kind of a nerf to Sun, but it's gonna have to see like how this plays out in practice. What we also see is a lot of the resistances get replaced by more useful additions or like properties, so I am actually happy about that. For example, bio-infection resistance wasn't as useful because it's not actually bioprotection. So it got replaced with healing effectiveness, for example, here on the Swamp Rod, which I don't know, I'm all for it, so I do like that. For example, also the Inkwell got its bleeding replaced with vitality, which is pretty interesting in my opinion, so that's pretty cool. Snake Eyes got its Psy emissions reduced from 5 to 2.5, which sounds like a big buff, but keep in mind you can only have 0.5 Psy now, so again, with the Psy it's kind of like not that much of a buff as it looks because of the way that it now reacts to your player. A couple of arties, like for example the Lemna, also got their bio-infection changed to bio-infection protection, which is pretty interesting as well. As I said, the Atom got absolutely changed, so for a long period of time the Atom has been an exception in the current artifact system, having an abnormally high number of infection outputs, and in the new container system leaving it that way was not an option. Instead it was given a special vitality property, so honestly I don't know if it necessarily got nerfed, it just got changed quite a bit. That's also why they offered compensation for it. The Eye of the Storm also got changed quite a bit. So it got changed to a defensive artifact instead of a standard one. So this artifact was a half-baked remnant of the Whirlwind and basically a parody of a defensive artifact. Considering there are plenty of speed artifacts in the game and there's no analogy for the mirror, they have decided to transfer it to defensive artifacts. So as you can see, a bunch of properties got removed, the resistances, which were kind of useless anyway, and a lot of the infection properties got added, but it also got the vitality -8, just like the mirror has essentially. Then the Amberite, which also got a big change. Amberite, being a tier 4 artifact, was supposed to have higher infection levels. Combined infections were an exception in the previous container system, and Exbo is trying to eliminate any exceptions. Therefore, instead of giving it a high infection of 2.5, it was decided to reclassify it into another type. The possibility of using Amberite without a counter artifact is still there, but in return it lost some of its stats, but it can now counter thermal artifacts. I don't know, as someone who had an Amberite, this is way less useful for my build personally, so I am kind of disappointed with this one, but hey, at least you get a compensation for it, so that's pretty cool. For example, as you can see here with the Rubik, all the resistances also got changed to protections, which is pretty cool. And the Polyhedron was one of the other 4 mega changed ones. The Polyhedron had exceptions in the current system and still has one. Originally it was not supposed to have reduced infection, nor to have an infection output. So they have changed the bio-infection with movement speed, which honestly I think is fair. I mean, it was cool that it had bio-infection, that made it fit in with PvP builds very well, almost too well a little bit. So I do understand that they want to change that, and honestly movement speed is still useful for PvP, I guess, depending on your build. So this also makes it more of the anti-snipe like artifact, so you can, you know, use a speed build as a sniper with a Polyhedron now becomes more logical. Which I guess just changes its use slightly more. I'm not too fussed about this, but again, if you are, you can get compensation for this, so that's pretty cool. Alright, and then lastly, these are surprisingly not mentioned in the specific containers and artifacts rework article, but only in the patch notes, so that's kind of weird, but I'm mentioning them here anyway because they are super relevant to the changed meta for the artifacts and containers. So there have been some pretty huge consumable changes. These first ones, I mean, are still huge, don't get me wrong, like Schizo Yorsh being kind of changed and pretty much nerfed essentially is a big deal in a way, but I'm more of talking specifically in this context about the Jolly Lemonade Brine, Tinfoil Hat, Subtropics, Vodka, and Industrial Alcohol, which I will get to in a sec. So first of all, the Jolly Lemonade has been completely changed. It doesn't do minus radiation anymore, and neither vitality. It just has movement speed and laceration now, making it kind of not good anymore, to be honest. Same goes for Brine. The bio-infection got removed, which this is what I'm talking about with the triple shard. This is just impossible now. Well, it's not impossible, but as in like the whole previous meta, relied on you drinking brine, for example, or jelly lemonade in some cases, but mostly brine for the shards. So yeah, it's just not possible anymore because it does not exist anymore. So it completely changes the meta, and I personally think it's for the better because it will force people to work more with the new containers and all the freedom they have with that, instead of like it essentially just relying on a consumable that's only craftable in the hideout. I don't know. I think this is better for the long-term health of the game, but I have seen some people pretty upset about it because they invest quite a few rubles in that build. But yeah, I guess this is just the way it goes in an MMO. Then the same goes for the tinfoil hat. It also got psi emission removed and just got like movement speed, healing effectiveness, and like all that stuff. So it's still actually pretty decent compared to the Jolly Lemonade. Then subtropics, the frost was removed and the vitality as well. This one got movement speed, healing effectiveness, and reaction to burns. And then vodka got changed for a short-term boost back to a radiation removal tool, which is kind of interesting. So it's just only to remove radiation, -10, because it only lasts for 5 seconds. So yeah, it's not, unless you're chugging vodka every 5 seconds, it's not very useful to build like a radiation build. Same goes for an industrial alcohol. It has its poison reduced by quite a bit, so you don't like die, you can out heal it. However, its duration has also been changed to 5 seconds, and its purpose also to radiation removal, so it's not actually useful unless you need to get rid of radiation very fast. Then the experimental thermoplate and frosty vodka and stuff, they just also removed the frost removal. Alright, that is it for the changes. Let me know down in the comments if you have any questions about specific artifacts or things, and I'll try my best to answer it. I mean, I'm also just a player, you know, in a certain way like you guys. I will try to research my answer as much as possible. But yeah, feel free to let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see what I can do. Anyway, thank you for watching this video. Let me know down below, what do you think of these changes? Do you like the new artifact system? Do you like the new container system? What do you think of this whole overhaul of the meta? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Let me know down below. If this video was useful, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you want to stay up to date with more Stalcraft content and updates. If you want to support what I'm doing, you can become a member today. The more members, the merrier, and as a thank you, you will get access to exclusive content and functions of the channel. Anyway, if you want to watch more Stalcraft content, you can find the Patchnote video here on the left, and you can find some gameplay videos here on the right. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the zone, Stalkers.